All right, so another one of the major paradigms related to how we view psychological disorders is the cognitive behavioral paradigm. So on this first slide, we're going to just talk about primarily the behavioral stuff. And so if you look at people's problematic behaviors, a lot of why people engage in problematic behaviors is because in some way, shape, or form, they're getting rewarded or reinforced for doing it, right? If you, for example, if you have an anxiety disorder and you're afraid to speak in public, but you're so anxious that you can't speak in public, you can avoid that situation, right? And this isn't to blame the victim in any way, shape, or form, but it makes sense. If something really bothers you and you don't have to experience it, you can get away from it. The same with obsessive compulsive disorder or the way people experience depression. All these different things can help people avoid uncomfortable circumstances. Similarly, a lot of bad behavior is reinforced. A kid throws a fit and they get a toy. And I know that's really basic, but that happens in a lot of different ways. I mean, the adult version is the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And I had a interesting experience recently in trying to get something fixed that was not working correctly at our university. And I had talked about it in calm, rational terms on multiple occasions with various people in positions of authority. And nothing changed until I actually became upset, which was really out of character for me to become upset about something that I've been trying to get this problem, and it's a big problem, fixed for a couple of years now. And no one listened until I was upset about it. And so you can see how we sometimes in our society reinforce bad behaviors, right? When I went and talked to these individuals calmly and demonstrated the problem, they gave me lip service that they would fix this, but they never did until I actually became upset about it. So you can see how we frequently reinforce bad behaviors. Moving on. Other common behavioral interventions, and a lot of interventions in psychology that are behavioral in nature sound really easy, but the practice and implementation of them is actually very difficult to do it right. So there are things like timeout, behavioral activation, which is a super effective treatment for depression. You go out and you do things in life and it helps get rid of the depression. Exposure therapies are the best therapies we know of for anxiety disorders. So a lot of really effective treatments come out of this behavioral paradigm. And we talked about it more in chapter 1, so I'm not going to cover the details of the behavioral paradigm again. Okay, so behaviorism was criticized for ignoring thoughts. Remember, Bandura wrote about modeling and talked about cognitive mediation, and so it opened the door to cognitive psychology to being incorporated into it. Before that, they were very separate, but moving along. Cognition, mental processes of how we perceive, recognize, conceive the world, judge the world, reasoning, everything that's going on in your brain, right? So within cognitive psychology, we create schemas or way of viewing the world. We have a schema for what a boss is. We have a schema for what a significant other is, what a child is, what a friend is. We have all these different schemas of how we view things. And a lot of times our difficulties in life come from when things don't fit how we think they should go. So part of what cognitive psychology does and the therapy that results from cognitive psychology is when people get into problematic thought patterns, helping them develop healthier thought patterns and sometimes change their schemas or come up with new schemas or think about things in a new way that can fit with their existing schemas. So we change the way people are approaching their lives to be healthier. Okay, so let's see. Cognitive behavioral therapy attends to thoughts, perceptions, judgments, self-statements, and unconscious assumptions, and engages in what we call cognitive restructuring, so changing the pattern of how people think. If someone's thinking about everything in very negative terms and themselves in negative terms, we can see how a lot of psychological disorders can come from that. If we can change the way people are thinking about the world and perceiving the world, it can lead to much healthier mental states. Okay. One of the pioneers with this was Beck, and he was one of the major theorists. He talked about people having distorted perceptions. So if someone always views people as out to get them or things never go right for them, if we can start helping them think about things in healthier ways, they can do much better. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy is now on what we call third wave cognitive behavioral therapy. And the current cognitive behavioral therapies have really added in Buddhist type beliefs into the therapy. And these are ideas of acceptance and mindfulness, being mindful of your physiological state and your mental state and how you just are, but also learning to accept your emotional reactions. So a lot of times within the world, within psychological disorders, what leads us to difficulties, and I'd say this is true of everyone, not just people with psychological disorders, is that we have certain emotions that we label as bad and unacceptable. Like, I can't feel sad, I can't feel this, I shouldn't feel this. And so when we start, I shouldn't feel anxious, I shouldn't feel lonely, I shouldn't feel fill in the blank. And because a person starts to feel that way, they start to fight against those feelings and they don't want to experience those. So a big part of this Buddhist thought that is incorporated into the third wave cognitive behavioral therapy is learning to just accept our emotions and accept what we're experiencing. It's okay that I feel this way, and just accept it rather than worrying about it. And that can actually be very freeing for people. So that's where third wave cognitive behavioral therapy is much more on that acceptance, mindfulness piece. And it's led to these three big therapies that have all been found to be very efficacious. And we'll talk about those more as we go throughout the term. So that brings us to our third possible activity. And this activity is an interest, something that I just want you kind of start thinking about now. And that's that religion and psychology frequently are viewed as being at odds with each other. And if you look at psychologists, the majority of psychologists are not religious. The majority of people getting PhDs in psychology do not have religious faith that they belong to. Okay, but if you look at Americans, the vast majority of Americans are religious, and that sets us up for an interesting place. So here's the activity: the majority of therapists are not religious and do not receive training on how to address religion in therapeutic settings. And that's very common. According to a recent study, only 10% of therapists that are getting their degrees are trained in addressing religion. And the majority of therapists are not religious themselves. So we also know that the majority of Americans are religious, and that the majority of clients report that they want to discuss religion in therapy. So religion's a big part of the majority of people's lives, and the majority of clients state that they want to be talking about their religion in therapy, but the majority of therapists aren't religious and don't have training in how to do this. So with that as a backdrop, what I want you to do is share two advantages and two disadvantages of including religion, a person's religion, as a part of therapy. So I want you to start thinking about that, because it's a big part of people's lives, and it's interesting. And the reason why I came to this activity is it's interesting that the third wave of cognitive behavioral therapy has really added in Buddhist ideas in order to enhance what we are already doing in cognitive behavioral therapy. So incorporating religious ideas, not from the Judeo-Christian background that's common in the United States. And I wonder if that's why psychology found it palatable, but those are to incorporate it, but those are just my musings. But yeah, just a very important part of psychology, of people's lives, is religion, and psychology has largely ignored it in a lot of areas. Now that doesn't mean it's totally ignored it. We have a whole branch of studying religion, but it's been largely ignored in a lot of these things. So just an interesting activity for you all. All right, that is it for this video. One more video for this chapter and we'll be done.